Joining me now, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, let's talk about the ideal end game here beyond just a temporary ceasefire. What is it?
Well, obviously a big setback with Hamas choosing not, for the second time, to abide by a ceasefire. As long as they are sending rockets over the border, as long as they continue their, incursions via these tunnels, obviously the Israelis are going to respond. It is imperative, of course, that these aggressions stop, and then all of these. We can begin to talk about them around a conference table, which is where this stuff needs to be solved if we're not going to see the daily toll of the dead that we have been living with for now well over 2 weeks.
The New York Times reporting that support for Hamas is spreading in some parts of the region, notably now in the West Bank. One resident telling the Times, quote, "I give my children to Hamas. My son, who is 10, is asking how he can join these people." If the shift in Hamas's popularity in the West Bank, if that shift continues, what's that going to mean?
Well, it's, of course, moving in exactly the wrong direction. And you sometimes get the dispiriting feeling as you think about this conflict now, coming on 60 years, that the more violence there is, the more fighting there is, the more people seek desperate solutions to their problems. But, of course, that's exactly the wrong direction to go in. Look, Hamas cannot win. Hamas is not going to militarily defeat Israel. So, frankly, their continued military activity is both pointless and continues to put their own people at risk. And at some point, the people of Gaza are going to have to understand that they are being ruled by a group of people that the rest of the world considers terrorists, and that are, whatever their complaints against Israel. And, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, there are people who have a long list of complaints against Israel. Whatever that list of complaints may be, being spoken for by people that the rest of the world considers terrorists, and who by their activities show themselves to be terrorists, is not the way out of this mess.
Let's turn to Libya now. We know that U.S. officials were evacuated overnight from the embassy because of raging violence between local militias there. What more are you hearing about all of that?
Well, Tripoli has obviously been going downhill for a couple of weeks now. The central government there has no ability to assert control of a very small area of the capital city, and these militias that frankly we were helping when they were all sort of had their guns pointed on Muammar Gaddafi are now fighting each other, not unlike what we are seeing in Afghanistan and elsewhere. And Craig, who knows? Who knows when it will be safe to put our people back from Tunisia into the embassy in Tripoli? But there's a larger lesson here that I hope is not lost as we think about Syria, as we think about Iraq. We were all in, along with the Arab League and a lot of other countries, in bringing down Muammar Gaddafi, which, let it be known, very, very bad guy. But we always need to be conscious about what happens the day after when a very, very bad guy goes away. We need to keep that in mind as we think about Syria, as we think about Egypt, as we think about Iraq.
It sounds as if you're suggesting, Congressman, that perhaps some of these bad guys like Bashar al-Assad, it sounds as if you were suggesting perhaps we should not be so active in trying to get them out?
Well, interesting question, and I'm not sure I'm ready to suggest that. Assad is an awful human being. But if you think about Syria and you ask yourself the question, does the U.S. critical national security interest lie in focusing on Assad, who is a bad guy with no particular ambitions with respect to the United States or the West or Israel, or is it to focus on ISIS, which now has about a third of the nation of Syria and a good chunk of Iraq? The answer is kind of a no-brainer on that one. Our critical national security interest is in going after ISIS. Look, if Assad is replaced by somebody better, God bless. But there is a cautionary note here that these countries that have been held together by strong men for a very long time, it gets an awful lot worse after they're gone. We hope it goes here, but before it gets better.
Congressman Jim Himes. Congressman, thank you.
Thanks, Craig.